Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Facebook Live. Today is Tuesday in January. Gosh, it's like, hello. I think it's the 17th. Actually, I had to think for a second. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and a lot of people had off from work and school. We were open, actually, and it's nice for us to be open while other people are off because it gives a lot of working folks a good chance to come in and see us. So welcome back from your 3-day weekend if you had that. I think it's been a really interesting time in American politics. A lot of, I've been glued to the news, but I've really been working very hard on not letting the news come into my body and not getting stressed from the news, right? Managing it, just seeing what it is and still breathing and not letting myself feel anxious or worried or concerned about the future, and to really just practice my mind-body skills. And so I'm not avoiding the news, but I'm holding it. I'm really working on holding it in a different way. And so I hope that's my wish for you as well. And so it's an interesting week this week with the inauguration. And we're going to talk about stress and the adrenals, right? So it's actually a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today about stress. And I don't know, not everybody might be feeling as stressed as I am about politics right now, but if you are, we're going to talk a little bit about stress and the effect on the body. And so we are going to continue today. So welcome again as people I know roll in slowly to join us live. Today we are continuing our 4-part series on fatigue. And what's the definition of fatigue? I don't know that I even talked about that last week, but sometimes the word fatigue is a little confusing, and so I often just ask my patients, do you wish you had more energy? Do you wake up rested in the morning after a good night's sleep? And like on your checklist of why you're here to see me and what you want to work on, do you wish you had more energy? I mean, that's sort of the simple way to go. And for some people, they just simply wish they had more energy, and in a simple way. And then for some people, they're really fatigued and they can't get out of bed, really sort of flatlined. It's derailing everyday activities and really interfering with their lives. And so there's a whole spectrum of just wishing you had more energy, but you're still functioning where other people are really affected by the lack of energy and the fatigue. And sometimes the fatigue comes along with brain fog, difficulty concentrating. Often there's lack of interest in sex because you're just tired and want to go to sleep. And so there's a lot of effects of feeling tired. And the checklist, so there's actually a very long checklist for why you might be tired. And in functional medicine, we really have this goal of searching all the root causes and going through that checklist to figure out, is it food? Is it your hormones? Is it toxins? What is it? And the strategy for evaluating each one. And so my idea for this 4-week series was to go through my checklist with you and to share it with you. Now, if you haven't already done this from last week, I'm going to show you. I actually have a link that you can just click on the link right in front of you on the Facebook page. And it's my checklist for fatigue. It's my fatigue checklist. Do you have fatigue? And here are the main causes that I go through with my patients. I hold this paper in front of both of us and we go through and I explain the testing that we're going to do. Last week, and you can go and watch last week's again. Last week we did, is it nutritional, right? So the 4 main categories in the 4 weeks is going to be nutritional, and we did last week nutritional, what you're eating, how you're eating, do you have any nutritional deficiencies? That was last week. This week we're doing hormones. We're doing all your hormones, the whole orchestra. So it's thyroid, adrenal, sex hormones, it's insulin, which is a hormone. So all those things we're going to talk about today. Next week we're going to talk about toxins, toxins and infections is week 4, but toxins and food sensitivities is going to be next week. And then the final 4th week we're going to talk about, do you have chronic infections and how to evaluate that and how to study it, as well as potential gut microbiome imbalances, which I put with the infections and alterations in bacteria. And so here's your checklist. download it, you'll have it in front of you. The other thing that you see in the checklist, and I put up this week's, which is hormones, it's behind me on the board, is that each week we're going to highlight a particular test that I use, and that you can get through functional medicine companies. And so the test we're going to highlight this week is the adrenal saliva test. And actually this is one of my adrenal saliva tests from a while ago. And I'm going to take you through this. But you'll see on the form you're going to open up, there's a link you can click on, which will take you to Genova's website, which is this company. And there are many, many companies that do adrenal saliva testing. And but I gave you a link to one, the one that I tend to use here. And so you can actually read about the test, you can figure out where to get the test, etc. Okay? All right, so let's talk about hormones and the hormone orchestra. Basics. I think of the hormone system as an orchestra of different hormones that are all led by a conductor. So who's the conductor of the orchestra? It's your pituitary gland. In your brain, you have a gland. It's a gland called the pituitary, and a gland secretes a messenger that travels throughout the body and has action elsewhere. And that's what a hormone, that's the definition of a hormone. A hormone is a messenger, chemical messenger in the body that has a distant effect. It's released from one place and it has an effect elsewhere. And in the brain, the main endocrine hormone place where hormones are made and secreted, it's the pituitary. The rest of the brain secretes neurotransmitters. And so the pituitary sits right next to something called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus-pituitary connection is where all your impulses in your brain, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, jump over and trigger your pituitary to release hormones. And so it's the main sort of mind-body connection, right? Because it's one of the main places where the mind-body connection happens, where the mind and brain has directly hardwired into an endocrine organ, the pituitary, that releases hormones that travel throughout the body. And the pituitary releases compounds. It releases something called thyroid stimulating hormone, which goes to your thyroid, and it releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which goes to your adrenals, right, and tells it to go. It releases LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which go to your ovaries. And in men, it goes to the testes, right? That's the third endocrine organ, right? So we have thyroid, adrenal, and sex hormones. And then the final hormone that I always mention in hormones, because it's important for energy, is insulin. You know, insulin is released by the pancreas, and it helps control your blood sugar. Cortisol, your stress hormone, also controls your blood sugar. But wild ups and downs in your blood sugar, which we addressed last week, we talked about it with regard to food. And if you're eating a lot of carbs or sugar and your blood sugar is going up and down, you're going to be tired. You're going to get a burst of energy and then you're going to crash. And so stabilizing your insulin by how you eat is really an important part of sort of our strategy for treating people with low energy. I call it fixing food or eating for energy. And so that's actually all I'm going to say about sort of the insulin, because we really talked about that last week, but I do keep it under here so that, because when I do blood testing, and this whole panel is sort of gaining weight, hard to lose weight, feeling sluggish, feeling hairs falling out, feeling cold, low body temperature. People diagnose themselves, and I have people that walk in all the time and say, oh, I can't lose weight, I'm feeling tired and cold all the time, there's something wrong with my thyroid. And everybody thinks it's their thyroid. And sometimes maybe it is. And there's a lot of issues with the thyroid gland that we're going to go over. But I do want to put out there on the outset of the conversation that when you make a list of all the symptoms of hypothyroid or a sluggish, low-functioning thyroid, the same symptoms, adrenal fatigue, which is a low-functioning adrenal gland, you have very similar symptoms. The adrenals are critical for your metabolism. The adrenals are involved with your blood, with your temperature regulation. So all those same symptoms from thyroid fatigue or hypothyroidism, you could have from low-functioning adrenals or imbalanced adrenals. Or, there's a discussion now, is the word adrenal fatigue, is that really a diagnosis? And sort of we'll get there. I want to start with the thyroid. But I just, again, want to point out that the adrenal issues with your adrenals can mimic issues with your thyroid. So in order to, as we're going to talk about working on the thyroid, you must also work on your adrenals. So you have to test both and support both at the same time, because they will both work better if both are working better. Hopefully that just made sense. So what do you want to know about your thyroid gland? The first thing about a thyroid, how do you know, what do you test for, and how do you know if you have a sluggish thyroid gland? The test that your doctor will do is called a TSH. It's the most common test. It's the screening test everybody uses. That test just is checking your pituitary hormone, right? That's TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is made in the brain. And that's the hormone that tells your thyroid to get to work. The thyroid itself makes something called T4, and the 4 stands for iodine. It's a thyroxine molecule with 4 iodines. The thyroid gland makes mostly T4. It makes a little T3, and that just has 3 iodines, right? Very simple. But when the brain tells the thyroid to do its work, the thyroid gland makes mostly T4, sends it out into the body, it drops off an iodine and becomes T3 at the cell level, and then it helps the cell work. So T3 actually is the most active form of it. T3 goes into the cell itself and acts at the nucleus of the cell to change the way the cell behaves. And so T3 is really, really important. So sometimes I like to think of your thyroid hormones as an iodine delivery system, right? Think about that. It drops off an iodine. The iodine does its own work at the cell level. You need iodine for all your cells to function. And so the T4 that's made in the thyroid gland, you really need that iodine to support your thyroid. And actually before the whole autoimmune epidemic, the #1 cause of hypothyroidism was iodine deficiency. We used to have a lot of iodine in our food. Actually, I have a feeling I'm going to talk about thyroid all day today. I don't know if I'm going to get to adrenals, but we'll see. There's so much, as I'm telling you about the thyroid gland, I'm thinking, my gosh, there's so much to talk about. But we used to have iodine we used to have iodized salt. We used to have iodized bread. They used iodine to make bread. And then there was a big pushback, and the government took iodine out of everything, and instead they added bromide, like bromide to the flour that make the bread, and they took iodine out of the salt. And I grew up with no iodine in my salt. The table salt was all this Morton's, table salt with no iodine. Or actually, maybe when I did grow up, I'm older than most of you, or maybe not, but I'm dating myself a little bit, but I think I had iodized salt when I was very young. But in the past 20 years, it's been until the more recent couple of years where now there's a lot of iodized salt everywhere, and everyone's getting the pink salt and the Himalayan salt and the iodized salt. We went through a period of 20 or 30 years where there was no iodine in the salt. And so iodine deficiency used to be the #1 cause of an enlarged, swollen thyroid called a goiter. Goiter just means your thyroid's enlarged. And it's enlarged because it's trying to work. It doesn't have what it needs, but it's trying. And so the cells sort of overgrow in their effort to try to get the job done. And so make sure you're getting some, first take home message, make sure you're getting iodine in your diet. Make sure you're getting iodine in your multi. You should change all your salt over to real salt or the pink salt or fully mineralized salt. I personally use kelp flakes at home also and sprinkle it on anything I'm making. I also use kombu, seaweed. There's seaweed strips, and I use kombu strips, and I put them into my soup when I'm making soup, making quinoa. Anything you boil, anything you cook, you boil the strip of kombu in with your food, and then you can take it out or chop it up fine and eat it with your food. But kombu or seaweed or kelp or iodized salt, you must get that into your diet every single day because you need iodine. Iodine has been shown, there are studies which have looked at iodine and reducing breast cancer and just cell health, and so we really want iodine. So that's the thyroid. That's the first part of the thyroid I wanted to mention. So coming back to, 2 minutes and then I'm going to take questions, so maybe we might have to push this off a little and I'll talk about adrenals next time, but quickly, the other big cause of a low functioning thyroid is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune condition. And so when you ask your doctor to go, so how do you evaluate your thyroid gland? When you go to your doctor, make sure you ask for a TSH. You want to get, and I have it up here for you in your handout, that I show you, have it on your handout. All the tests I want you to get, because I want you to check your T4 levels, I want you to check your T3 levels, and I want you to I screen everybody that comes in for the antibodies for Hashimoto's. Because if you have an autoimmune cause to your thyroid, low functioning thyroid, just taking thyroid hormone replacement and you're hypothyroid and your doctor says take Synthroid, take Armor, take thyroid hormones, you're going to be missing looking at the cause, right? So it's sort of two things going on. You might be a little sluggish in your thyroid function, but the question is why? Is it because you don't have enough nutrients, like iodine? Or is it because your thyroid's getting damaged? And what can cause thyroid damage? Autoimmune disease can cause thyroid damage, like Hashimoto's. The other thing that can cause thyroid damage without having actual autoimmune is our toxins. You can get pesticides taken up into your thyroid gland, mercury goes into your thyroid gland. That could be a cause of the autoimmune disease, but you can also just have toxicity in your thyroid gland, and that is why your thyroid's not functioning well. The other thing that can trigger a damage to your thyroid gland is the Epstein-Barr virus. After a case of mono, some people have a little, sort of episode of Hashimoto's or hypothyroid. You can see the TSH go up. And I don't want to, I'm going to just backtrack for a second. The lab test TSH that your doctor's going to measure, right? Remember I said that's the one that's made in the brain. That's the one when it's high, it means your thyroid's low. Now think about that. Your brain is yelling at your thyroid, come on, make some hormones. And if the thyroid isn't working well, the brain will shout louder and louder. It's sort of like the thermostat and heat in the room. Once there's enough heat in the room, which is your T4 and your T3 hormones, the brain can the thermostat shuts off, right? The brain, the TSH can normalize. And so if you see your TSH creeping up over the years and it crosses over 3, 3.5, 4, once it gets over 3 or 3.5, I start getting a little concerned the thyroid's a little sluggish. Technically speaking, your conventional doctor will diagnose you with hypothyroidism if your TSH is over 4.5. In functional medicine, we always pick things up earlier, and that's why I say in the range of 3.5 to 4.5, maybe it's a sign something's going on and you want to really look at nourishing your thyroid gland and helping it work better. And the way you're going to do that, you already know you're going to take a look at iodine in your diet, but you're also going to look at your toxins. You're going to make sure you're not eating too much fish with mercury. You're going to practice some sort of ongoing, regular detoxification program. And we always, here at Blum Center, we always talk about detoxing twice a year. Some sort of liver support 21-day detox. These you can do it through any functional medicine program. Some sort of liver support detox program. You can do juice cleanses. We have, one of my favorite passions is food and using healthy food, antioxidants and greens. And I have a company I help co-found called Organic Farmer, and there we make really great juice cleanses that are fully sound nutritionally to cover everything your liver needs. And there's a way to help your liver work better to unload the toxin load in your body. And so causes of Hashimoto's, we talked about toxicity. Epstein-Barr virus, your immune system should clear out at some point and you should recover from that. If your immune system isn't clearing out your Epstein-Barr virus, then you should look to the gut, because 70% of the immune system's in the gut. And actually, gluten is another trigger for Hashimoto's. So if you have Hashimoto's, gluten-free diet, as well as check your gut microbiome. You might want to do a stool test, and we'll talk more about that in week 4, the health of your gut microbiome, because autoimmunity really, good gut health is really important for autoimmunity. So if you find yourself in that Hashimoto's world where that's the reason you have hypothyroidism, then you must fix the immune system, and that's what will ultimately help your thyroid work better. So I'm going to pause for a second. I know I went over. Are there any questions, Sarah, for me?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
I notice I feel sluggish after unhealthy meals. Is that related?
Yeah, so the question is the feeling sluggish after you eat an unhealthy meal. Well, I can relate to that because that happens to me also. I think the cleaner, as you clean up your world and clean up your diet, and you eat really healthy, meaning you eat low sugar, and what does it mean to eat an unhealthy meal actually? And I think that's a personal thing for each person. I know for myself that if I eat gluten, when I eat gluten and when I and probably dairy too, but certainly if I have wine and gluten and I go out to dinner, the next day I am exhausted and I have brain fog, but I eat really clean that next day and then I'm good. I rebound very quickly. So I guess what I would say to you is that yes, it's very common to feel especially tired after eating unhealthy, and that is not so much related perhaps to your hormones, unless you don't sleep good that night before, the night after you don't eat, the food triggers you to not sleep well. But that could be just related to toxins in the food or your blood sugar or just general inflammation that happened from those foods you ate. And we're going to talk about that next week because we're going to talk about food sensitivities. And once you figure out that you have food sensitivities, eating those foods will make you tired. So that was a little circuitous way to answer your question, but tune in next week because I'm going to talk more about that one then.
The next one's, what should I look for when buying kelp or seaweed? This is new to me.
Yeah, so how should I buy kelp or seaweed? So thank you for asking that question. I didn't want to, gosh, I could keep drilling down on like each thing I mentioned and talk more about it. After Fukushima in Japan, we actually switched everything at Organic Farmer and my own house, and personally my house, to Maine Coast vegetables. And we get our seaweed from, it's called Maine Coast, and you can actually get it from Whole Foods. And organic from the Atlantic side of the ocean. We used to get it from Japan and the Pacific, but I became very concerned about sort of radioactive material coming from the leaking plant from Japan, and that's where a lot of the seaweed used to come from. So I would find the company Maine Coast, and you can get, and that's really, once you get from them, you can really, there's nothing else really to look for. You just want to choose. Learn how to do it, I guess. And so kombu is the easiest one to try because it comes in strips, and you just really, it looks like it's very hard and stiff. And when you throw it in water, it gets very soft, and you just take a little piece and you throw it into your cooking anytime you make anything that boils in a pot. Any kind of soup, any kind of beans, any kind of quinoa. And that's it. Voila! Really easy. You can find great cookbooks that have sea vegetable cookbooks and start experimenting even more. The kelp flakes are really easy. It's in the salt aisle. It's where all the seasonings are, and it's just a little shaker thing, like a salt shaker, full of kelp, and it says kelp flakes, and you just sprinkle it on your food. So yeah, enjoy that. Experiment with that. Food is medicine. We use supplements, but at the end of the day, the way I always say this is, find out what your potholes are, use supplements to fill those potholes, and then we drive down the road with food as our main way of staying healthy.
Great.
Next question.
Thoughts on armor thyroid?
Okay. Another really important question that we needed to address is what kind of thyroid hormones should you take if you're on medication? So the question was about armor thyroid. So there's two different kinds. There's actually, let's start with the first two broad categories of prescriptions you can get. If you're hypothyroid and you decide you want to take medication, you can either do just the extracted compounds like T4 and T3. You can take T4 like Synthroid or levothyroxine, that's T4. And this is made in the lab, and it's basically a chemically, it's a bioidentical hormone to your hormones, right? So it's T4, it's bioidentical. And you can also take a prescription T3, and the common one is called Cytomel. And those are hormones that your doctors can prescribe to replace your thyroid function. And I do like giving T3 with the T4. I usually don't just give one, and I always measure both. But a little T3 often will help you feel better, because sometimes you can have plenty of T4, but you're not converting T4 to T3 very well. And that's one kind of, there's all different kinds of problems you can have. The thyroid could make plenty of T4, but if you're not converting the T4 to T3, then you might feel sluggish. You also could have a problem because you're not, the thyroid hormones actually have to get into the cell to work. And if you have a lot of stress, a lot of high cortisol floating around your body, cortisol will block the action of the thyroid hormones at your cell. So you actually might look like by your blood test you have plenty of thyroid hormones, but your cortisol is preventing them from working. That's a really, really important piece that people don't realize, which is why if you have high cortisol or high stress, You must learn to meditate. I'm going to come back to the armor in a second, but you must learn to meditate, and you must learn meditate or mind-body exercise or manage your stress or do yoga or find some technique that's going to help you, reduce your cortisol levels, right? Because that's interfering with your thyroid function. But I want to come back with another alternative prescription that you can get, which is called Armor. And there's two other versions of it. One's called Nature Throid and one's called West Throid. So there's 3 different glandular kind of supplements that you can get. When I say glandular, they're extracts from they're porcine glands that are chopped up and sort of calibrated so that we know exactly how much hormones you're getting in there. The nice thing about taking Armor is that you're getting T4 and T3 in this right ratio, and other kind of compounds from the thyroid gland that are thought to be helpful, and it's in its own natural setting. So it's a glandular, and so it energetically gives you a little bit more, it's thought to give you more thyroid support than T4 and T3, and a lot of people feel much better taking glandulars. And so you can ask your doctor to give you Armor. Now the only thing I will say is that some people, if you have very, very high antibody levels, sometimes Armor, by taking the glandular, you actually might feel a little worse. The jury's out on this. We don't really know whether or not some people, and I've had the experience of, I generally don't give Armor to people who have high antibody levels, but I have other colleagues in functional medicine who do, and find that they believe that it's helpful. I've seen people sort of bump up their antibody levels by giving them extra thyroid tissue in the body, even though it's from a pig. So I generally wait until the Hashimoto's is under control, and then I'll switch somebody over to a gland, to the Armor. But I do think, I think it's worth a try, and you should see if it helps you feel better. So I don't know if that made sense, but I'll re-summarize that. If you have Hashimoto's and high antibody levels to your thyroid gland, you can try Armor and see if you feel better. Some people do and some people don't. And I think that that's the best way I'm going to say that. In general, if you're just hypothyroid and it's not Hashimoto's, or you have mild Hashimoto's, try Armor. It's a nice way to get the thyroid. It's a nice way to get the thyroid prescription, or to support your thyroid in a very balanced way. Another way to do it, if your doctor doesn't want to give you Armor, this is something I take every day. I actually take a glandular from a company called Biotics, and it's a thyroid support supplement, but it has a little glandular in it that has just a little T3. It doesn't have any T4 in it. And so it just gives the thyroid and gives you just a little bit of T3 support. And so you can actually get from a supplement company a glandular that has T3 in it. And so that's another way to support your thyroid. One other thing as I'm saying this, and then we're going to wrap up because I'm down to my last minute. There's some people who like to give iodine at very high doses. There's this like iodoral, it's called iodoral, or other big iodine tablets. And they have 12.5 milligrams, like really in the milligram dose versus microgram, right? Like really mega doses of iodine. There's a lot of concern about giving those really high doses of iodine to people with very high active Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I do not suggest you do that. The concern is that you're going to fire up the thyroid gland so much that it triggers something called oxidative stress. It just stresses the thyroid gland out even more, which will cause more antibodies, and so people feel worse. And early in my practice, many years ago, I used iodoral a lot in my practice, and I generally don't do that anymore. So I just give 200, 300, 400 micrograms of iodine every day. Like the amount that's in a multi will have 200 micrograms. Use it in food and not push those huge mega doses. It could actually it could stress your thyroid by throwing it into the on switch in such a big way so quickly that it will cause a lot of stress to the gland and more damage, right? So that's just my little tidbit out there. So sometimes more isn't better. And so I'm going to leave us today with, I think this is my whole push these days after doing functional medicine for, I'm going on almost 20 years. I mean, it's just a long time. I don't know, 16, 17 years, is to bring the sanity back, okay? We're about balance. We're about fixing the foundations. We're about using food as medicine. Sometimes faster and more is not better. The terrain of your body takes time to change. So work with food, work with your hormones, bring them back into balance, and you will feel better. Enjoy your week. I will see everybody back here next week. Same time, same station.